He stepped out of the mall into the crisp evening air, the scent of rain mingling with the faint aroma of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe. The fluorescent lights from the shops reflected off the wet pavement, glinting on puddles like scattered shards of glass. His arms were heavy with shopping bags, receipts crumpled and forgotten in his coat pocket. He was lost in the pleasant numbness of a day spent buying things he didn't need, when something at the edge of his vision made him stop. There, under the flickering glow of a neon sign, crouched a figure wrapped in a threadbare coat. At first he assumed it was just another beggar, a lonely soul trying to survive the drizzle. But then he saw her face. His heart skipped. It couldn't be, yet it was. The same girl who had vanished from his life months ago without a word, leaving nothing behind but the memory of laughter and the ache of sudden absence, now sat hunched on the curb, her small hands gripping a cracked tin cup. Her hair was tangled, matted against her pale cheeks, and her eyes, wide and wary, darted between him and the people passing by as if she feared being noticed. Time seemed to slow. The world, the mall, the neon lights, the shoppers bustling past, blurred into a haze around him. Questions collided in his mind. Why was she here? How had life brought her to this? Why hadn't she come back? Or at least sent a message? His throat tightened as he realized the girl he had loved, the one he had desperately searched for answers from, was now reduced to asking strangers for spare change. For a fleeting moment he considered walking past, preserving the comfort of his orderly life, pretending he didn't see her. But the memory of her smile, her voice, the way she had once filled his world with light, held him frozen. Compelled by a mixture of guilt, longing, and curiosity, he moved closer. He dropped a few bills into her cup, careful yet trembling. Her head snapped up, eyes locking with his. Recognition flickered, then shame, then something fragile, hope. The rain dripped from his coat onto the pavement, the cold seeping into his bones, but he barely noticed. He realized this encounter wasn't a random crossing of paths. Life had thrown them together again, demanding answers, forgiveness, and perhaps the first step toward healing the wounds left by her sudden disappearance. And as she looked at him, trembling, he understood that nothing would ever feel the same again, because their story was far from over. He stood under the mall's awning, the drizzle soaking the edges of his coat, and gestured for her to come closer. She hesitated, shrinking back as if the very sound of his voice might shatter her fragile world. He could see the pride in her posture, the tension in her hands, and the hesitation in her eyes. Finally, with a trembling sigh, she stepped forward, the cracked tin cup clutched tightly against her chest. He could barely recognize the girl he had known, her bright, mischievous spark, dimmed under months of struggle. But there was no mistaking the curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, the faint scar of a smile that once lit his mornings. Words tumbled out of him, awkward and jagged at first. Why didn't you contact me? Where have you been? What happened? The questions hung in the damp air like smoke. She shook her head, unable to speak at first, staring at the puddles forming at their feet. The silence pressed heavily, broken only by the soft patter of rain. Then finally, in a voice that was small and hesitant, she began to speak. She told him about the months he hadn't seen her, how life had turned against her like a relentless storm. Her parents had disowned her after a fight she hadn't known how to avoid, leaving her alone to navigate the city streets. Friends had betrayed her, promises broken, and survival had become a daily negotiation with hunger, cold, and humiliation. She described sleeping under awnings, searching for leftover food, and avoiding people who looked at her with pity. Every word seemed to carry the weight of all the nights she had cried herself to sleep. He listened in stunned silence, his chest tightening with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and helplessness. He wanted to hug her, to protect her, to shake her for leaving without explanation. But he didn't know where the anger ended and the compassion began. He saw in her eyes that she hadn't disappeared out of malice. She had simply been swallowed by circumstances she couldn't control. And yet the pain of abandonment was real, and it flared painfully in his own chest. The rain fell harder, drumming a relentless rhythm on the awning above them, but neither moved. In that wet, cold moment, they were suspended in time. Two souls confronting the consequences of absence, survival and misunderstanding. He realized that forgiveness wasn't going to come easily, and trust would need to be rebuilt carefully, one small step at a time. And even in her shivering vulnerability, he could see the faint glimmer of the girl he had once loved, a spark that told him this encounter was only the beginning of a story that still had chapters left to write. He took a slow breath, the rain-soaked air sharp in his lungs, and extended his hand, not just as an offer of help, but as a lifeline to the girl who had haunted his thoughts for months. She looked at him, her eyes wide and uncertain, flicking from his hand to his face as if afraid to trust the world again. The streets had taught her caution, the kind that made survival possible, but left hearts guarded and fragile. Yet something in the steadiness of his gaze, in the quiet patience behind his words, softened her defenses. Tentatively, she placed her hand in his, small and cold, and a shiver ran up his arm. Not from the chill, but from the weight of everything unspoken between them. He led her away from the curb, the puddles reflecting the neon glow of the mall behind them, symbols of the life she had left, and the life he wanted her to reclaim. They walked in silence for a moment, not because words were lacking, but because silence allowed them both to process the gravity of the moment. She shivered, and he draped his coat over her shoulders, feeling a quiet surge of protectiveness. He didn't offer platitudes. He offered practicality, a warm meal, a safe place to stay, and the chance to rebuild. It wasn't a fairy tale. He knew that, but it was real, and right now, reality was enough. As they found a nearby cafe, warm and brightly lit, he pulled her inside, seating her at a corner booth. The smell of coffee and bread, the chatter of other patrons, and the warmth of the room were like stepping into another world, a temporary sanctuary from the hardships she had endured. He ordered something simple for her to eat, watching as she hesitated before tasting it, uncertain if comfort could still exist for her. He didn't rush her, didn't press her to explain everything at once. He simply sat across from her, present and patient, letting her set the pace. Slowly, hesitance melted into conversation. She told him more about the months she had survived alone, the mistakes she had made, and the lessons learned in pain. He listened, acknowledging each word, each scar, each struggle without judgment. In that warm cafe, under the soft hum of conversation and the patter of rain outside, they began to rebuild the fragile bridge between them. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, and trust wouldn't be given freely. But in that moment, hope returned. A quiet, fragile light flickering again between them. And as she looked up and met his eyes, he realized that sometimes endings weren't truly the end. Sometimes they were just the beginning of a new chapter, waiting to be written together.